Chapter 25, Mendocino County. Within 10 days of my scheduled release date, I was transferred to San Quentin due to the fact that I fell under the criteria of a high-control parole release. Toward the late 90s, several incidents occurred where violent-prone parolees were released and had either committed brutal assaults or violent murders within hours of their release. After a statewide public outcry criticizing the procedures in which CDC was releasing these parolees, anyone with a violent history now had to be picked up by a parole agent and transported back to the county they were being paroled to. On the day of my scheduled release, a parole supervisor by the name of Jerry Cardoza from Ukiah, California, drove out to San Quentin to pick me up. From the onset, I knew that paroling out to this small community in Mendocino County was going to be an encumbrance and an awkward transition, but this journey started going bad before it even began. Upon introducing himself as the parole supervisor of Ukiah, Cardoza pulled out a set of waist chains and told me that I needed to be secured until we got back to Ukiah. I wondered if this was just his normal practice or if I was just getting preferential treatment. I was paroling. I was no longer in custody and was now being released, so this didn't make any sense to me. I paroled like this many times before, and I knew that this wasn't the way that it was normally done. For a minute, it caught me a little off guard, but I complied with his instructions and wore the waist chains. Honestly, I didn't even care. I was just excited about being released and wasn't about to let this ruin my day. I assumed it was because of who I was or where I was going, to a small town unaccustomed to dealing with high-profile gang members like me. When Cardoza and I made it off the prison grounds and finally got on the freeway, there was a long, awkward silence at first. He began to open up a little, telling me about Ukiah. He said it was a beautiful area, a really nice community with Indian casinos and lakes. But then his reflections shifted back to obvious apprehension. He said, "Look, man, I'm going to be honest with you. We didn't even want you paroling to our community. We live in a community where we can still sleep with our windows and doors unlocked. We don't have a lot of gang activity out there. We have a couple young wannabes who think they're hardcore gang members, and that's it. We only had one drive-by a couple years ago, and that was done with a pellet gun. You just got dumped on us, and we got stuck with you." At first, I didn't know how to respond, but said, "Trust me, I don't want to be out there any more than you want me to be. I don't plan on being out there a day longer than I need to be, so don't worry yourself too much about it." Then I added, "I'm just going to try to do my parole out there, and then I'll be gone." When we finally pulled into Ukiah, I remember stopping through there on my way back from Pelican Bay. It was actually one of the pit stops where we pulled over, gassed up, and the transportation officers bought their lunches. Because I'd never even heard of Ukiah before, I pictured it being a small town with dirt roads out in the middle of the boondocks. But it actually wasn't that bad. It was a combination of a small city with a rural, campestral feeling about it that seemed neighborly. It was far from the bustling metropolitan city like the overly populous San Francisco. There was something about the peaceful atmosphere out there that grew on me really fast. Ukiah is like the main hub to all the smaller towns nearby that don't have supermarkets, fast food restaurants, or department stores. So it wasn't as slow as some of the other areas out there. Cardoza drove me up and down the main street, South State Street, giving me a crash tour to show me where everything was at, before driving me back to the parole office to have me sign parole papers. After we finished at the parole office, he drove me to a small hotel on South State Street where he used a voucher to get me a room for 2 weeks. When we got the key, he walked me to my room, took a quick look inside and said, "Well, this is it. Good luck and make sure you stop by the office next week." And then he left. That was it. I was finally back out on the streets again, free but over 100 miles from my hometown in San Francisco. My mind shifted to Connie and my daughter, and suddenly I got the urge to go see them. I actually thought about just leaving. Fuck this place. I didn't know anyone, I didn't have any resources out there, and I felt stranded. But I couldn't do that yet. I had too much to do, and I knew that once I split, I'd have to jump parole and I'd never get anything done. Besides that, it wouldn't be that easy to just go out to the city and see them. Connie was unpredictable. She might freak out and call parole on me. I decided to wait and play everything out by ear. At first, I didn't know what to do or where to go. I felt the effects of cabin fever really bad. I didn't want to leave my room and I felt like I was out of my element. The transition was overwhelming, and for a brief period, I felt like it was too much for me. A part of me even wanted to go back. It's sad, but it's true. I call it the Pelican Bay syndrome. This is a direct result of having been isolated in the SHU program for the last couple of years. When you're in the SHU, you don't realize it, but after long periods of being confined in that type of environment, it has an adverse mental effect on you that doesn't become noticeable until you step back out. It eventually wears off and subsides over time as you reacclimate yourself. But for the first couple of weeks, I'd always become overwhelmed with anxiety. In these types of isolated environments, you train and condition your mind to operate a certain way. Everything you can't see is based on sound. When someone's on the tier, when the canines, the officers, are getting ready to search, when it's time to eat, when it's count time, when there's a threat, etc., etc., you develop an acute sense of awareness until it peaks and you're tuned into everything going on around you. So to come from this environment back out into society and make that transition is sometimes difficult. I decided that I was going to try to find a liquor store since one of the things that always seemed to help me relax was alcohol. I remembered seeing one a couple blocks away when I was with Cardoza, so I left my room and headed in that direction. It felt good to be out. I felt healthy. I looked healthy. It was just exhilarating to be given back all the simple freedoms that I always took for granted. But I also knew that I stood out like a sore thumb. I felt like everybody was watching me. When I finally found the liquor store, I bought a 40-ounce 211 malt liquor, a case of top ramen soups, a jar of mayonnaise, some pepperoni sticks, 2 bags of chips, and a bottle of Louisiana hot sauce. All the ingredients to make prison-type spreads. I was definitely institutionalized, and this was a pretty good indicator. I also did this so I wouldn't have to leave my room as much, as this would last me a couple days. After I paid for everything, I walked back to my room and started drinking. While in prison, I drank plenty of Pruno, jailhouse wine manufactured by fermenting fruit and sugar, but it had been almost 3.5 years since I had a beer, and this was malt liquor. After I finished the 40, I was relaxed enough to where I decided to go back out and find something better to eat. I found a small taqueria about 3 blocks away in the other direction and stepped inside to grab a burrito. As I stood in line to place my order, I noticed a youngster wearing a red 49er jersey walk in and stand behind me. He looked like a little homie, but I just stood there waiting in line. After a few minutes, he said, "Hey homie, you're not from around here, huh?" I turned around and said, "Nah, bro, I'm from San Francisco." He asked, You just get out?" I said, "Yeah, bro, I just paroled from the Bay." He said, "You got people out there?" I told him, "Nah, I don't know anybody out there. I don't even know my way around. I just barely got out today." He said, "Hey, my name's Pep, bro. If you ain't doing nothing, you can come kick it with me and my little homies. I'll show you around out here and we can go kick it in Hopland." He seemed like a cool little youngster and I wasn't doing nothing. So I said, "Yeah, they call me Boxer, bro. It's all good. I ain't doing shit right now anyway." When Pep and I walked out to the parking lot, we jumped into his lowered Monte Carlo and took off to the next town over in Hopland. It's only about 10 minutes south of Ukiah. As soon as we started driving toward Hopland, I knew I was already taking a chance and violating my parole. Part of my conditions was not to associate with other gang members, and I knew that if we got pulled over, I was gone. Aside from his Monte Carlo being lowered and sitting on Dayton's, he had a top-of-the-line system in it, and he had it turned all the way up. As I was sitting there in the back seat listening to the music and some of the lyrics, I realized that this was actually a Norteño rap CD that the NF had promoted. A Norteño street gang member by the name of David Sardino Rocha from Tracy, California, was authorized by the NF to collaborate with other Norteño rappers from various cities in California to produce a Norteño-themed CD. The purpose behind the CD was to unite all Norteño street gang members across California and to incite attacks on Sureño street gang members who were infesting our neighborhoods. And it worked. With tracks like Sureño Killer, Next IV Till Eternity, the escalation in violence was almost instantaneous. It created a fad amongst young, aspiring norteños that encouraged them to go out and fight, assault, and kill sureños. A lot of the lyrics were actually derived from the Nuestra Raza's format, but were spun to legitimize the content and to avoid duplicating it verbatim. However, the message was clear, and the NF's objective was being felt all across Northern California. A C by the name of Robert Huerito Grattan from Modesto, California, was given clearance by Gerald Cuete Rubalcaba to produce and promote the CD, and he was the one who was overseeing this project. The first time I heard it, I couldn't believe how close some of the lyrics were to the NR format. But this was just a classic example of how clever the NF had schemed to continue promoting its influence and control over the streets. I was almost begging to go back, riding like this. When we got to Hopland, we pulled over at a liquor store and got a couple cases of beer. I bought 2 more 40s of 211 and then we drove to Pep's house. He introduced me to his lady and a couple more of his little homies. We stayed there for most of the afternoon until all the beer was gone. Then we headed back to the store. I had already slammed back 3 40-ounce bottles of 211 and was beginning to fill my liquor. When we walked into the liquor store, I saw a small selection of daggers and pocket knives in a glass case by the register. I bought a small dagger in a sheath that was about 6 inches long with a pearl handle. I don't even know why I bought it. Probably because I was buzzing and had an infatuation with knives. Now I was definitely on the fast track to going back. After we left the store, we drove around Hopland and stopped off at a couple more of Pep's little homies' houses, and then we jumped back on the freeway toward Ukiah. By now, it was already past midnight, so I told Pep to drop me back off at my hotel. As soon as I got back to my room, I laid the dagger on my table and then I crashed out. Fortunately for me, I had developed an internal clock from spending so many years in prison and woke up like clockwork every morning at 6 a.m. When I woke up in the morning, the first thing I did was open up my front door to let some fresh air in. Something told me to either get rid of the dagger or put it away somewhere because I had it sitting right there on top of the table. I put it in the bathroom underneath the plastic bag that lined the garbage can. I began to wash up and clean my room like I used to do every morning in prison. Not even 5 minutes after I was done, my front door swung open and in stepped 5 officers from Ukiah PD. They said, "What's up, boxer? We just came by to introduce ourselves and do a quick parole search." I couldn't believe it. I was definitely going back for the knife because even though I had just hid it, I knew they were going to find it. As they started flipping through my stuff, I just sat there and didn't say anything until one of them walked into the bathroom and started looking around. I had to say something to distract this cat and get him out of there. As soon as I started to talk, he reached down and picked up the garbage can and began tilting it around in circles to look inside. The garbage was empty. So as he tilted it, I could hear the knife sliding around in the bottom and was almost positive he heard it too. I looked at him and said, "I haven't even been out 24 hours yet. Why are you guys doing a parole search?" He put the garbage back down on the floor and said, "Parole just wanted us to let you know that we're going to be watching you and that we're out here, so it's not personal." I said, "Okay, that's all good," and then they left. I just sat there for a minute shaking my head. I just dodged a bullet. I couldn't believe how close they got and didn't find it. I waited for a couple minutes until I was sure they were gone, walked into the bathroom and got the knife. I just wanted to get rid of it because that was way too close and I knew they would probably be coming back. When I walked out the front door, I was getting ready to throw it over the fence at the back of the parking lot when my neighbor came out and said, "Were they over there in your room?" He was a middle-aged white guy wearing no shirt with a big-ass beer belly, barefoot, sipping on a Budweiser. I said, "Yeah, they were doing a parole search." I asked him, "You want this knife? Otherwise, I'm just going to throw it away." Needless to say, he took the knife and we started talking. I told him I had just paroled from Pelican Bay and a little bit about my circumstances. I told him that I didn't know anybody out there, didn't even know my way around, that I was from San Francisco, and that I was probably going to bounce back out there once my voucher was up. His name was Charlie, and he was staying in the room next to me with his wife Julie and their 3 kids. They had a 3-year-old, a 2-year-old, and a 6-month-old infant. Over the next couple of days, my mom and stepfather Don came out there to visit me. Afterwards, I had 2 different women come up there and spend the night with me. Both of them drove up from San Francisco. One of them I had just started writing when I was in prison, and the other one I had been having an on and off relationship with for the last couple of years. I was tempted to leave with each one of them, but I stayed because I just wasn't ready to start running yet. Every night, Charlie and Julie would come and knock on my door with a dinner plate full of food that they had cooked on a hot plate. It was kind of cool to have met someone like this couple who understood my situation and who were obviously trying to look out for me. But it was also a constant reminder of how badly I needed to get myself back on my own 2 feet. One day when I was laid back on my bed talking on the phone, I had my front door open when Charlie's wife Julie came to my door and said, "When you get off the phone, come over." I said, "Okay, give me a minute." A couple minutes later, while I was still on the phone, I saw this girl walk by with a little boy, and she looked inside my room. I was in the last room, so there's no reason for her to walk by other than to just be nosy or to see what I look like. I started laughing to myself because it was obvious that Julie was trying to set me up with the girl. After I got off the phone, I walked outside. I saw Julie sitting there with this girl, so I sat down next to her and started talking to her. Her name was Melissa. She was a pretty girl with a nice body, and she was 3 years younger than me. But she wasn't the type of girl who I usually went out with. But at that point, I had just gotten out of prison and I wasn't about to start discriminating. Within a couple of hours, I had already broken the ice and had my hands all over her. But with her 4-year-old son Lucas near, there was only so much that I could do. When it started getting late, Melissa said she had to go to work at the casino, but would stop by back after she got off work. She was a 21 pit dealer at one of the casinos, the Indian casinos in Redwood Valley called Ukiah. Later on that night, she came by and ended up staying the night. By now, I had a couple days left on my voucher, so I told her I was probably going to be gone when it expired. She tried to convince me to see if Parole would give me another voucher. I told her it wasn't so much me staying at the hotel, it was more so because I didn't want to live day by day and didn't really have any resources in Ukiah. Melissa ended up staying with me every night until I had 1 day left. She kept trying to convince me to stay. The following afternoon, I got a knock on my door. It was Melissa's mom, Colleen. She tried handing me $100 and said it was from her daughter, who wanted me to pay for the room for another 2 days. But I refused to take it. Her mom said, "Well, then I'm going to pay for the room myself." But Melissa said to let you know if she's coming by later on tonight. I ended up staying those next 2 days, and Melissa stayed with me. When those days were up, Melissa said, "You're coming home with me, so don't even think about leaving." I ended up moving in with Melissa and her mom and her 3 boys, Lucas, Dylan, and Drew. One day when we were walking to the store on South Dora Street, I noticed an individual wearing a red tank top sitting in a 65 Chevy. He was sitting in the front seat talking to a female. From looking at him, I could tell that he was a Norteño and had more than likely had done time, but I was a little leery because I knew he might have been a dropout. When Melissa and I walked by the first time, neither one of us said anything. But on our way back, he looked at me and said, "Hey, what's up, homie?" I said, "What's up, bro?" He got out of the car, put his hand out, and said, "They call me Wormy. You ain't from around here, huh?" This was how I met Wayne Wormy Patrick, aka Night Out from Santa Rosa. After talking to him, I found out that he had actually done time in the Bay before and that he was a validated NR member. He told me that he had just discharged off parole and was now living there in Ukiah with his girlfriend, Vicky, and her 10-year-old son, Rudy. It was real rare to find someone out there that was of this caliber. Over time, Wormy and I would become real tight. Whenever I wasn't at home with Melissa or watching the kids, I'd usually go kick it with Wormy in his carport. We'd be lifting weights or sitting out there drinking beer and listening to oldies. Over time, I began to proposition him about the idea of working together with me to establish a regiment right there in Ukiah. Wormy basically told me that he'd assist me with whatever I needed, and he was willing to commit to functioning with me. With Wormy's contacts and resources, this put me on the fast track and eliminated a lot of the grunt work I'd normally have to do whenever breaking ground in a new area like this. Over the next couple of months, I managed to settle myself into this new area and actually began to like it out there. I even managed to find a full-time job doing floors. But after 5 short months, I got arrested for a DUI and was transported to the Ukiah County Jail. This was my first time in that jail. It was a small jail compared to others I had been to. They were real leery about me as soon as At first, they didn't even want to let me out with the rest of the inmates because of my affiliations and their concerns about me being able to program with the white guys. That and the fact that I had Nuestra Familia tattooed across the back of my head real big. I guess they assumed that since we were potential enemies in prison, it might carry over in the jail. This jail was almost exclusively all whites and Indians. As far as I was concerned, as long as nobody had an issue with me, I wasn't tripping. When the doors opened up for program the first time, they kept me locked in my cell. Most of these guys stopped by my door and went out of their way to be real social with me. These were just regular white guys not affiliated with nothing. There were a couple skinheads that came through, but there wasn't any issues with them either. Eventually, some of the guys began asking the deputies to let me out and told them that there was no reason to keep me locked up. Later that day, one of the lieutenants pulled me out and told me that he had concerns about letting me out because of my profile. I told him, look, there's no issues with me. I'm just passing through on a parole violation, so you don't need to treat me any different from anyone else. He said, I'm going to let you come out, but if you do anything to anyone, we won't hesitate to give you a new case. I told him, fair enough. They watched me real close, but most of these Indians and white guys took a liking to me. There was never an issue, and parole ended up giving me 5 months for the DUI since I was working again. Once again, I was transported back to San Quentin.